In the aftermath of the devastating floods in KwaZulu-Natal, many relive the trauma as they search for missing relatives. Families move from mortuary to mortuary in the search for loved ones. I'm joined now by Nozi Nyawose, a clinical psychologist, to talk about the floods as a traumatic event. And we explore support mechanisms for victims and survivors. Nozi, good evening. Thank you for joining me. It's an important conversation, is it not? I mean, the focus always seems to be about the devastation and, the number of people that have died and how people will survive over the next few days. And sometimes we push the conversation about trauma and mental health to the back burner. But we should not, should we?
Well, you know what? Very interesting times indeed. I think one common thing that's been happening with the people, just the whole country, is we haven't recovered from just recent traumas. The COVID, the July unrest, and so much more. And now to experience this in KZN, I think, the issue of mental health is not one that can go unnoticed at this point, because there are so many overwhelming feelings at this point that contribute to so many traumatic symptoms. So we definitely cannot ignore that topic.
Would you say that even as we deploy the search and rescue teams and the SANDF is out there in full force and everyone is just trying to carry out that work, there should actually be a contingent that actually hits the ground of people who, such as yourselves and other professionals in the space, and does that happen?
Definitely. There's a lot of community psychological debriefs that are going to be needed and that are going to be very crucial for people who have experienced the direct and indirect trauma. At this point, we are trying to assist as best as we can. One thing that I am sure of is that many public sector facility hospitals have also been affected. So it becomes quite difficult and resources are quite limited. But at this point, it's very difficult to cope with the trauma of losing a loved one, and especially in this manner and extent. So I think more healthcare providers are needed to lend lending hands for everyone that's been affected.
And how difficult is this period when people don't know the whereabouts of their loved ones that they last saw perhaps a week and a half ago, if not 2 weeks at the start of this whole situation of flooding, looking for them, trying to reconcile themselves with the probability and the reality that those relatives are no more. But at the same time, you can't really start the grieving process until, you locate their mortal remains. Just that as a traumatic event, how difficult is it?
Oh, my God. I mean, having to identify a body among so many bodies that have been lost, and tragically so, can be absolutely traumatic. I mean, those images constantly keep playing in the head. And for many people, they become nightmares, and people are unable to heal from this, and they become victims, unfortunately, of so many health conditions that affect their mood, their behavior, and overall well-being. So it's quite an overwhelming feeling, and I think it's going to take some time until people have completely healed over this.
And lastly, Nozi, what are some of the things we should be doing now then to address this problem that we've identified? What should be happening now? Should people be reaching out to the services in as far as are available in the public sector? But would you say that even those who can afford to assist should be reaching out and doing that? What are some of the mechanisms of dealing with this situation?
From a psychological perspective, I think constant support is important so that victims don't feel isolated, and a safe emotional space is needed for them. Obviously, government will also have to come in terms of physically containing the victims, because so many of them have lost their homes, have lost their sense of belonging and personal possessions. So it's important to give them that space and help them explore the facets of the grieving process. and the expected symptoms of trauma, which will definitely be inevitable. And I think I think there's so many civil society organizations that have come together, and we are so grateful because we do see the work that many people are doing and the donations and the contributions. So I think definitely people should continue to assist as best as they can. Any help is definitely appreciated at this point in time.
So you mentioned grief there in this conversation since we started. You mentioned grief. You mentioned the constant nightmares, the images that are burnt onto people's minds from this process of having to go from mortuary to mortuary, trying to identify loved ones, etc. So just talk to me then about this whole issue around loss of housing. Is there a sense that develops of displacement, and perhaps even associated with a feeling of having lost everything that you have, a void of sorts, and a lost dignity?
Definitely. I mean, as I think we can all agree, a home is one of the main sense of belongings that a person can associate with. Now, losing everything, personal possessions, identity documents, certificates, people have lost absolutely everything. And with that, obviously, there's a lot of symptoms that are going to come into play. You know, dissociation, the void, as you say, feeling empty, feeling lonely and isolated and withdrawn and detached from basically everything, because everything has practically been lost. So I think, as I said, it's going to take a long time for people to really heal and deal with this. But I think the steps of grieving have to be explored now more than ever.
Yeah. Lastly then, Nozi, just to make this really helpful to people, I know you may not have telephone numbers and email addresses at hand. If you do, please do share. But what kind of doors should people be knocking on at the moment?
I think the government has been assisting, as we have been seeing, and there's a lot of organizations that have also come into play. Gift of Givers has also been doing a lot, and there's a lot of foundations that have been assisting. I think that there are many people in remote areas, unfortunately, who have been complaining that they've been using their own resources to get to help, to get those, to get to resources. So I think that people should definitely be reaching out to each other, community members. We should be identifying people who have been severely affected and trying to assist and getting as much help as we can for them.
Right, I've got to thank you for your time and your insights. That's Nozi Nyawose, who is a clinical psychologist, talking about the traumas associated with having lived through that situation, the flooding in KwaZulu-Natal.